Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
We are in the third part of the triennial reading. We're in the third year of the triennial reading, so we're reading the last third of Parashat Vayigash, of the parsha in which we have Yosef revealing himself to his brothers and then asking after his father and bringing his father and brothers down to Mitzrayim, down to Egypt. So we will be starting with the triennial division. Given the electric, spirited nature of the conversation last week, I am willing to go off the triennial topic if we need to process a little about this part of the Joseph story. Any other part of this week's parsha, I'm willing to go there. I know there's a lot of feeling in the room about Joseph and his situation. So you will take hopefully a Jewish journal with you when you go.
Page 46.
On page 46.
Just checking the page.
Is a Torah commentary that I wrote for the Jewish journal. My first. We'll say Shechianu, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam, Shechianu V'Kimanu V'Higianu Lazman Hazeh. And so it's not on this part of the parsha, but I'm actually well versed now in the other section of this narrative as well. All right, so let's look at 46:28. We'll start here, and if there's not enough we want to say about that, we can back up a little bit. Somebody want to read?
Judah he sent ahead of him to Joseph to show him the way to Goshen. So they came to the region of Goshen. Joseph harnessed his chariot and went up to meet his father Israel in Goshen. He presented himself to him and threw himself on his neck, weeping all the time. Israel said to Joseph, "Now that I've seen your face, for you're still alive, I can die at last." Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, "I'm going to go up and tell Pharaoh. I will say to him, my brothers and my father's household who were in the land of Canaan have come to me. The men are shepherds. In fact, they are breeders of livestock, and they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they own. Therefore, when Pharaoh sends for you and asks, 'What do you do?' say, 'Your servants have been breeding livestock from youth onwards to now, both our households and our father's households, in order that you may live in the land, in the region of Goshen, for Egyptians find shepherds abhorrent.'"
Okay.
Joseph.
Wait, let's stop there. So Judah goes ahead, right, to Yosef, and so everybody's coming down to Goshen. Goshen, we know from the archaeological record, is a place where when there was famine in Canaan, in southern Canaan, Goshen was a place that people would go in order to find work and food, and then, because it was close enough that then they could go back home, presumably, when the famine, the crisis in Canaan was over. Why might there be food in Goshen when there's not in Canaan when they're so close together? Sheldon gets the gold star today. Agriculture in Canaan is dependent on rain. All agriculture is dependent on water. Absolutely. That water comes in Canaan in the form of rain, and it must happen in its season. If the rain doesn't happen in its season, you have flash flooding that washes everything away. Right? You all live here. You've lived here. If you've lived here for any length of time, you all know what I'm talking about. If the land is really dry, and then there's a downpour in the dry season, it takes topsoil and shrubbery and everything else with it as the wadis become raging rivers, and it does absolutely no good and tears up a lot of the actual soil that's used for growing stuff in the right season. That's why when we open the prayer book and we come to the Amidah, right, we come to the Tefillah, we say either Morid HaGashem, right? We bless God who brings down the rain. Mashiv HaRuach, who makes the wind blow. Mashiv HaRuach, Morid HaGashem, thank you, and causes the rain to fall. Or, right, we switch it when it's not supposed to rain where? In Israel. That part of the Amidah is not about rain for us. It's about rain in the land of Israel. And we switch it. We don't say Mashiv HaRuach or Morid HaGashem in the dry season. Because you don't want it to rain then. Right? We're not going to talk to the God who makes the wind blow and rain to fall then. Right? We'll call God something else. Right? God who brings the dew. Because plants survive in the desert. If they don't survive by rain, in other words, if there isn't rain, the other way they have developed to survive is to capture dew. So they have either leaves, that are out and then can, whatever it is, the technology of the plants that survive in the harsher desert regions of Israel survive because they can use dew before it dries up, right? They capture it before it dries up in the sun and goes away. So we know that people, when they were suffering in Canaan, often because agriculture in Egypt is dependent, as Sheldon said, on the Nile. It's a whole different business, possibly, not always, but often. It's a whole different business in Egypt, what's happening with their agriculture. All right, so we get this narrative. So there are often people coming to Goshen in times of crisis to work and to live. This is the case with Joseph and his family. So Joseph ordered his own chariot, right, and went to meet his father Israel. The rabbis have a lot to say about this. Where do you think the rabbis go with this? That Yosef goes to meet his father in the chariot. What value do we take from this?
Respect for our parents.
How is it respectful? How is this demonstrating respect?
Well, he went to meet him.
Well, yeah, he's a big wig. Usually it's the other way around for him.
Right? So there's a couple of places the rabbis quote exactly this. Someone of high status going out and taking himself to meet someone of lower status is considered by the rabbis to be the way we're supposed to do things. That we're supposed to humble ourselves, particularly if we are important. If we are successful and powerful and important, it is even more important to the rabbis that we express humility. Right? So the other one, we'll see if you remember it when we get there this year. The other one is Moshe. That there's trouble, right? And Moshe gets up and goes down. It's with Datan and Aviram. We remember, right? The insurrection, the rebellion. Moshe gets up and goes to them. And the rabbis have lots of midrash about even with Moshe's enemies, even with the troublemakers, Moshe, the leader, took it upon himself to go to them to start a conversation rather than like getting all cray-cray.
Didn't Abraham go out to meet the three?
And Abraham goes out to meet the three strangers. He rushes out to meet them. So all over Torah, we see these examples that the rabbis really lift up as being more than just he did it. It's that this is the value we're supposed to live into. So he goes to meet his father, who we always want to pay attention to what he's called. Interesting. It's not Yaakov here, right? Interesting.
When did he start being called Israel?
When did he start being called Israel? With the wrestling. Who?
Oh, yeah, okay, I got it.
When Jacob wrestles with the, whatever it is, we no longer say angel in this class, right? Mm-hmm. Like, when he wrestles with whatever that is, he has his name changed to Yisrael, the one who wrestles with El.
I just thought it hadn't happened yet.
Yeah. A few weeks ago.
No. Or millennia.
Yeah, same dip. Ein mukdam u'me'achar b'Torah. There's no early and late in Torah.
We have a question.
Carol?
Why don't we say angel?
Oh, just because we've made the story much more complicated in our years of study. It's not just an angel. It's the Ish, it's the angel, it's God, it's him, it's his dark side, it's his shadow. It's, we've had many explanations in here.
I thought we didn't say angel because it's a very Christian concept. It's not malach.
So we do generally use angel for malach, even though it's a terrible
Malach means messenger.
Terrible translation, right? Because messenger is way better, but we're stuck sort of with angel in terms of the not semi-divine, the in between, right? Not human, not divine. That kind of weird other place.
Daniel has a question.
Daniel?
All Judah did was send ahead and tell Joseph they were on their way.
Well, for the rabbis, just. What do you mean, just? That's all he did.
It starts with Judah, but it's first, all Judah did was send ahead for them and then bring them together. He didn't have any other, at least on the surface.
Well, if we back up a few pages, which we won't do quite yet, it's Judah who really turns the whole thing. Judah turns everything, including, if you look at the Jewish Journal, there's a wonderful Torah commentary. Talks about it's Judah who turns Joseph's heart, who makes this moment of reconciliation possible. But we're just getting this reference here. But we talked a lot last week about Judah, right? Judah rises to prominence here and needs to, because who comes from the tribe of Judah? David. Okay, good. All right, so he meets his father, right? He presented himself to his father. Again, this idea that he didn't wait for them to bring his father to present his father to the vizier of Egypt. He presents himself to his father, embraces him, and according to the Hebrew, vayevk, he wept on his neck. Ode. Interesting. What other translations do you have for that? He wept on his neck what?
It says weeping all the time.
A good while?
A good while.
All the time.
All the
Yet
time.
More.
Huh?
Yet more.
Yet more.
Because he had already wept before.
A bunch.
He left the room.
Right. Presumably that's a while ago. Right? That's a while ago. Now this is now the time where his father had to get there. Right? So this is 2 weeks later. But not to discount the fact that we've seen Yosef weep a bunch. That is significant, I think. We don't get emotion in Torah, right? We've talked about this a lot. We don't get emotion. We don't get motivation, right? We don't get psychological states of being in the Torah. Torah's not interested. The fact that we see Yosef weep so many times is important in the creation of this narrative. Because this is just not something we see. First of all, from men, right? But second of all, he's very emotional. We understand why. I'm not saying it's odd. I'm saying we don't get any emotion back here.
Abraham weeps for Sarah.
He grieves.
Okay.
And often that's where we see weeping, right? Is with mourning, death. So that Yosef's doing it so much not about death is fascinating. Where else did we see an incident of people falling on each other's necks and weeping?
Two brothers who requested
Oh, Esav and Yaakov. So this is, right, this is the way Torah, for those of us who know these stories, it's a way that Torah brings it around again, right? This is one of the beautiful literary devices in Torah. We've seen this coming together and falling on the neck business before with Yaakov. He does it with Esav, his brother, when he goes back, and now he does it with his long lost son, Yosef. Amy, I hate to do this to you. I really do. I apologize. It's sad. Isn't it horrible? He reconciles with Esav after how many years of being apart, never sees his mother again, we don't really get him and Esau doing anything together until it's time to bury their father. And now, yes, he's reunited with Yosef. They fall on each other's necks. There's this beautiful scene of crying, and we're about to hear him say, "Now I can die." Right? Like, so it's, think about how long he's been separated from Yosef. He's lost his wife. How long ago? And I just can't help, and we're going to hear him say it for himself, but I can't help but see the irony in the fact that all of these reunions and falling on necks that Yaakov has happened, really, their closure, and there's still this huge, gaping, sad emptiness in the middle of that closure. Does that make sense?
I don't think. Am I correct that it doesn't say here what Jacob's reaction was? You said they both fell on each other's necks. Does the Hebrew say that? Because the English basically says that.
Well, Jacob doesn't push him off.
Doesn't push him off, but we don't know what's going on with Jacob.
We don't.
Maybe he doesn't.
We can assume.
Or not.
He's moved because of what he says next. We can assume he's deeply moved. He may not be the one crying, right? But these reunions, I just find it a very poignant, maybe that's the word. It's a very poignant set of reunions that Yaakov goes through. None of them really being, oh, good, you're not dead 2 years after he got gone, right? It's 20-something years later. Amy?
Well, it's not enough to just have the person there. It's the time that has accounted for.
Yeah, so Amy's saying that it's not just having the person there, it's not having had, the time with them.
That you connect with after many years of separation, you realize you both changed. And all this thing that you specifically longed for all these years actually doesn't quell the desire, because the desire can never be met, because you're never going to go back to the time that you first were estranged. That's a loss.
Well said. That we change in the intervening time, especially when it's a long time. And what we yearn for, that we really do want to have reunion about, we do want to come together over, we can't ever really get. Because we're different, the other person's different, and or we're different enough to understand that the person can't and never could give us what we need. We can't go back, right? And fix it. We have to live into, of course, what's now. I'm not saying it's depressing. I'm saying I'm saying that there's a poignancy to what Torah does in this narrative that I find compelling. All right. So, and it's for a good while Yosef's weeping. I mean, you have to have this image of, I mean, you all know my story, and just having met my birth family, there's this, for Yosef, there has to be some level of just coming apart, right? Like, who he's been, what he's put together, for who he is and what his identity is. He's an Egyptian. He's a successful Egyptian. He's an important person, right? And now he confronts, right, his infancy, his childhood, his teenage years, and everything that should have happened with his father after that. And touches it. He grabs it in a way, doesn't he? He throws his arms around it and sobs. You have to kind of imagine, I think, that Yosef comes apart a little bit here, and not necessarily in a bad way. Like it's all just kind of coming out now for Yosef.
It's as if he was living with terrible loss, but was pulling himself together all the time. And now that he's found his father again, he recognizes that and can just let himself all over.
Also, it's coming up that the first thing Pharaoh asks Jacob is his age. That Joseph hasn't seen his dad in so many years, how old he's become. I know, my parents, hard to see them age. You want to weep. So, to see him again as an old guy, that can make you weep right there.
And imagine the shock of that.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like they were Skyping all this time, for him to see a gradual, right? That just the shock of how old and possibly frail Jacob is, because he says, Jacob thinks he's close to the end.
Yeah.
So it's not like he's hale and hearty. He's not like Reuben and Blanche, and right. He's not like raring to go no matter how old he is. He's thinking he's at the end. Right?
Later, doesn't Jacob say that his years have been very difficult?
Yeah, we're gonna go there. So Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and tell the news to Pharaoh and say to him, my brothers and my father's household who were in the land of Canaan have come to me. The men are shepherds. They have always been breeders of livestock, and they have brought with them their flocks and herds and all that is theirs. So that when Pharaoh summons you and asks what's your occupation, you will answer, right, we're breeders of livestock. We always have been. Our ancestors were big. And then Pharaoh will let you stay in the land of Goshen, for all shepherds are abhorrent to Egyptians. So Joseph is coaching the brothers and his father on what to say when summoned by Pharaoh. To some commentators say he's planting the seed the same way Miriam does with the daughter of Pharaoh when she says, shall I get a wet nurse for you? Right? That's a suggestion that the daughter of Pharaoh is going to keep the baby. She plants that idea, right, by asking a question. So similarly here, possibly planting the seed in Pharaoh's mind, Goshen would be a good place for them to hang out. So,
and that's because he didn't want them near the Pharaoh's palace, right?
We don't get a why.
But the shepherding is abhorrent, so they wouldn't be.
So they're going to be in the region of Goshen, right? We're not told why.
Well, why do you think?
Why do I think? Because that's the place that people went, right? They're semi-nomadic pastoralists, and so that they need land where they can raise flocks.
So it's true, they are shepherds. It's not a lot.
Right.
But
presumably,
the first thing out of his mouth.
So yeah, right. So part of the suspicion is like, what? Like you're coaching someone on the. That's like someone saying, okay, when they ask you what you do for a living, tell them you're a rabbi.
Yeah.
It's like, because otherwise I would tell them I'm a car salesman. Like what? So what's going on? And so one theory is that I just forgot what I was going to say.
It says here, in order that you may live in the region. Is the point here that he's wanting to settle them in Goshen?
Yes. So he has to get Pharaoh's authorization to settle them in Goshen. Oh, I know what I was going to say, Daniel. Yaakov is hugely wealthy. He's he's a sheikh. So a sheikh comes down with all this stuff. The suspicion is he ain't just raising sheep. Right? And so I think Yosef wants to not have Pharaoh or anybody get too worried or suspicious about, right, this hugely wealthy man coming down into Egypt. That he's not there to monkey around in Pharaoh's backyard, right? He's not there to monkey with anything. He's truly a shepherd.
Jacob is truly wealthy.
Yes. Yaakov is wealthy. Yeah. And so, he's coming down with his Hummers. Right? And so that could look a bit suspicious, right, to the government. Like, right? Pharaoh is an absolute ruler. And so he doesn't want somebody that he doesn't know setting up a racket in his backyard. And if you're that wealthy, it ain't just from sheep.
There's a word here translated as abhorrent into the English.
Mm-hmm.
Is that toava?
It is.
Is that?
It is.
Can you talk a little bit about the sense of that? Because we do meet that later.
So toeva is, right, toeva we've seen before. We've seen this in the context of things that are taboo. So it is a ritual It's a ritual abhorrence, right? It is hateful to Egyptians, the same way swine, right, eating that is toeva to the Israelites. So this is our concept. Toeva is a concept that is ours. The Egyptians have it too. It's no wonder, right? All the cultures of the ancient Near East would have had similar rituals and similar understandings of what is toeva and what isn't.
Given Joseph's status, it's also possible that it was in Joseph's self-interest to have Yaakov away from Pharaoh.
Okay, say more.
Well, Joseph is the counselor. He's got his position. Here his father comes down and was immensely wealthy. All he can see complications from Pharaoh's point of view. He said, look, maybe it's better we just keep the family aside.
Interesting.
They need to be anyway because they're readers. Let's just not raise problems if problems don't.
Nice. And we've talked a little bit about Pharaoh being Joseph's father, right? We talked a little bit about he's got a new father figure. And in some ways, Pharaoh may not exactly want birth dad, baby daddy on the scene, monkeying with his protege, the person who's become his son.
Looking at that way, Joseph is politically very astute about the family dynamics that could go on.
Watch, it gets more astute.
It's abhorrent. The same way that we all need fertilizer. We all really want fertilizer. We need it. We'd like to buy it with Miracle-Gro. But we can have very, very wealthy people who make fertilizer, but we really don't want them living next to us. So we can have somebody, it's abhorrent to have the factory in our backyard. So maybe raising sheep and raising animals, you can be wealthy, but it's not considered it's kind of a nasty profession, although it's necessary, and that's why it'd be abhorrent. So we need it on the outskirts of town. We need it in Fresno. We don't need it in Malibu or Palisades.
That is definitely part of it. Bert was asking me to talk to toeva as a concept, and usually it's ritual abhorrence. It is taboo, so not something that has an explanation. Right, it is.
Abhorrent in English is really extreme,
and it's got abhorrent has implications that are not there in the Hebrew. But I think in this,
not just nasty, but forbidden,
like off limits. And so there is that sense of toeva. But I think here it is much closer to what you're saying. That it's just kind of disgusting to the Egyptians. It's necessary and a function of society, but it's gross and it needs to be in the valley.
Yes. Well, maybe.
Sorry, no offense.
Maybe because everybody knew that being a shepherd was abhorrent to the Egyptians. He was warning his family, don't lie about this, even though you think they don't want to hear that you're a shepherd, tell them the truth.
Interesting, right? So do not set up any reason for Pharaoh to doubt you. I've told them you're shepherds, right? Y'all need to come clean. You may not be proud of it, but you need to be honest. Do not mess this up for me, like with Pharaoh.
The Green Book has a note that says that, first of all, this abhorrence doesn't necessarily refer to all shepherds, but possibly non-Egyptian shepherds, because it says the statement is not supported by Egyptian records. Moreover, even in the biblical account, Pharaoh has his own herds. So it's abomination or abhorrent, similarly to the way the Egyptians don't like eating with Israelites or anybody who's not Egyptian. So they'll put the non-Egyptian shepherds off in a separate place, even though Egyptians won't necessarily think of shepherding by Egyptians.
I'm not sure I buy it. All respect to the Green Book. Because the distinction between Egyptian, non-Egyptian professionals doesn't seem as meaningful. Not eating with, someone else. It was, that is toeva in its way, right? That we won't sit down and eat with foreigners because they carry that toeva-ness with them. I mean, we don't want to sit with that. Understandably, right? Here, it's like, it seems, I think it's actually probably city versus country a little bit. They're at Pharaoh's palace. They're in downtown, right? They're in Beverly Hills, right? So in that sense, it's like the low life, and so Pharaoh has those. He has people who tend his flocks, but he doesn't want to have them hanging around either. Right. He wouldn't sit with them either, but they're necessary, but.
Well, maybe Joseph doesn't want his father and his family to be assimilated the way he was. Maybe he wants
Interesting. Sheldon. That's 2 today for Sheldon. Interesting. So he knows what it is to have left those ways, those traditions, right? Presumably he's speaking Egyptian, right? He's complete. His wife is Egyptian. His children are Egyptian.
You're saying he has children.
He has children.
To this issue of wanting to be a little careful about the old family, maybe not. What's the situation with his kids and how he's going to raise them and deal with them?
So maybe he's even internalized some of the Egyptian values, and it's like, does he really want all of this Canaan family stuff around Ephraim and Manasseh? Is he sorry on some level? Does he want to protect them from what's happened to him? Or has he completely bought in to the Egyptian system and is a little, frankly, embarrassed by those backwoods Canaanite Yahweh worshiping folk, hillbillies?
Or all of the above.
Or all of the, it's Torah, of course it's all of the above.
But I also can't help but think Jacob isn't coming down just with his sons. There are hundreds and hundreds of people, and as you said, in their Hummers, and he's very wealthy. And this is a time like it is now. You have maybe 1,000 people coming with their massive wealth, and you don't want to get Pharaoh nervous that this could be an invasion. And so, tell him you're a shepherd and that you'll live over here. You don't have thoughts about invading.
Exactly. And to take it one step further, most of the conflicts in the ancient Near East and in the world today are often started. If you heard David Siegel, he said Syria is all about a drought. That's what started the business in Syria. I mean, not that that's not a tinderbox all the time. You throw a good match in there, but like in the ancient Near East, we know there was war constantly, right? To have an extended period of peace was what you wished for your children and grandchildren because it was unlikely. And it's resource scarcity that drives populations out of where they are. If they're coming out of where they are, they have to go somewhere. And if they're going to go somewhere that has resources, guess what? Other people live there, right? If there's resources there, it's populated. So you have to beat up the people who live there and take their land and displace them. Now, where do they go? They go someplace else and beat somebody else up. So this is how a lot of the population shifts and wars happen still today, but especially in this time. So if there's a famine in Canaan, it's not like the Egyptians haven't heard the news. So there's a famine in Canaan, and all of a sudden this huge group pushes down into Egypt. It's happened before. They've seen it before, but they have to be a little nervous. Right? And it's not like Egypt isn't dealing with a scarcity either. Joseph has prepared for it, but they're also dealing with a famine. And so there has to be serious anxiety around seeing, like you said, a couple of, at least 100 people coming down looking with their motorhomes, right? They're not coming with an overnight bag. They're coming with their motorhomes. Like they're going to park their trailers and they're going to be here for a while. That can look like, at the very least, they're starting to come down. Right? They're going to start consuming our resources. That's the least. At worst, this is the beginning of an invasion from the north. But Egypt was the empire of the time. So Canaanites aren't going to make them. It's like, are we going to be invaded by Canada? Ooh, we better be careful. Here come those Canadians, right? So it's not huge, but it's got to be of some concern, at least at the level of they're taking our jobs, right? Which we hear a lot about on TV and the radio these days, don't we? They're taking our jobs and we're supporting them and they don't belong here.
No, in the language that we would, the invasion from Latin America. It's an invasion.
Meaning not a military invasion, but just feeling invaded in terms of they're taking what's ours. Mm-hmm. Right. Xenophobia, right? Which is certainly at work here. Sarah?
This reminds me of things I heard when the Persian Jews started to come to Temple Sinai. They're not like us. They're very different. And, there was a lot of difficulty absorbing them, which did happen eventually. But in the beginning, it was not like they were even Jewish, but they were.
And I still hear it. Oh yeah, like someone made a comment just the other day. We were talking about something that happened with the family. Said, "Let me guess, they're Persian." There are some real differences that are hard to navigate and negotiate sometimes. And then there's xenophobia, which is a very real thing, not only in this part of the ancient world, but in general, right? Physical anthropologists believe that it's one of the ways that we survive and that we have survived as a species, is if you were suspicious about somebody who's not from your clan coming into your settlement, you were much more careful about keeping out germs and viruses and bacteria and things that you did not have an immunity to. That xenophobia is actually originally helpful and important in our survival. Now, of course, it's become something else.
I have a kind of an unrelated question.
There is no such thing.
Okay. Joseph, as you may know from the story, had a lot of trouble with his siblings. And it says in the Torah portion that his two sons were the two sons in the Bible who didn't try to, didn't have a lot of trouble with sibling rivalry.
Well, it doesn't tell us that. We have concluded that.
Okay, we've concluded that. Were they circumcised? Were they raised Jewish?
So there is no Jewish, right? Number one.
Raised, in the tradition of our fathers or of Joseph and...
We don't know. We don't know. We suspect they were Egyptian. But we don't know. And what does being raised in the tradition of their ancestors mean exactly at this point in our history? That would be an interesting hour. Right? Because already the way we've studied Sarah and Hagar and Leah and Rachel this year, we've realized that they were probably still very connected to the matriarchal Mesopotamian religion. Right? It's the men who were doing this Yahweh business. And so, what does it even mean to be raised in that household?
Do you know if they were circumcised? If he circumcised his sons?
Egyptians circumcised.
They did?
They did. So it's not meaningful in the way that we associate circumcision with being part of the covenant. Yes, Blanche.
I want to share an up-to-date story.
Please.
About Iranians. That was a time when I worked as director of fair housing right in Westwood. And I had a call that the restaurant that was built brand new by Iranians was vandalized. And it was just 4 blocks from where my office was. The whole thing was destroyed. There were feces. It was horrible. And they were afraid to complain. They were afraid to complain. And the same with where they lived. Their apartments were vandalized. And finally, the owners only rented to Iranians. So that was very disturbing.
And if apropos our story, Blanche, you're talking about They were vandalized, victimized, oppressed, and were afraid to complain because it wasn't their country. They feel, right, that if they make trouble, it could get worse, right? That's what we're about to see, aren't we? That's exactly what happens to Joseph's family after Joseph is gone. At the beginning of the next book that we're going to study together, God willing, that's what we see. They have become exactly that, a population that is vulnerable and oppressed and can't speak out on their own behalf.
So I called the local council people. They didn't do anything.
Right.
They didn't do it.
Right. So their assessment wasn't wrong. Right? That if we speak out, we're not going to get help at the least, and at the worst, it could increase the violence against us. All right. So, wow. Oh my gosh. Okay, so let's push on so we can see what happens. 47, yeah? Somebody read?
Then Joseph came and reported to Pharaoh, saying, "My father and my brothers, with their flocks and herds and all that is theirs, have come from the land of Canaan and are now in the region of Goshen." And selecting a few of his brothers, he presented them to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to his brothers, "What is your occupation?" They answered Pharaoh, "We, your servants, are shepherds, as were also our fathers. We have come," they told Pharaoh, "to sojourn in this land, for there is no pasture for our servants' flocks, the famine being severe in the land of Canaan. Pray then let your servants stay in the region of Goshen." Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "As regards your father and your brothers who have come to you, the land of Egypt is open before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best part of the land. Let them stay in the region of Goshen. And if you know any capable men among them, put them in charge of my livestock."
All right. So Yosef says that that my family, my father, and my brothers are coming down here for what? Lagur. What is lagur? Huh?
To live, reside.
Yes. What does it suggest?
We're not going anyplace.
They're not going anyplace soon. What else does it suggest about their status? Look at two of the letters.
Ger. They're strangers.
Exactly. They are there to reside. It is not their land. Lagur, their status becomes resident aliens. They are now ger. Where have we seen ger? Hagar. Hagar is our first narrative of the status of ger. We're going to see it over and over and over again, but this is the place, our first reference to this whole business that the Jewish people in some way is founded on. You shall never oppress the ger. Because you were a ger in Mitzrayim. Don't you ever forget. It ain't them. It's you. We can't ever otherize in our tradition. If they would just work harder. They're so lazy. Mooching off the state. If they would just pull themselves up by their bootstraps, you can't ever, you can have opinions, but you have to feed them. You can have all your rich Egyptian opinions, but you must feed and clothe and house the ger, whether you like it or not, because it's not separate, different, or other than you. This is where it begins. This is where we first see it in the narrative. This is the Passover Haggadah, right? That my ancestors went down to Egypt to sojourn there. Who grew up at the Maxwell House Haggadah? Went to sojourn there. Daniel?
You tie that bigger idea of to Judah saying, I'm bound up with them. You know what I'm going to?
So, mean, it's not unrelated, right? So one is at the personal level, Judah gets it that, our stories are bound together, or that's a reading of it, anyway, out of empathy, out of deep compassion and empathy. And this is at the national level, right? This is at a much bigger, not more important, just larger scale level. You are tied up with the rest of humanity who live among you as resident aliens. Don't ever think they're different or other than you. Fundamentally. I mean, obviously their circumstances are different, right? And Torah is big on acknowledging that we're different, we're separate, we're other, we're different. Fine. You can't use difference or other as a way, a means, or a justification for oppressing anyone or allowing them to languish below a certain level of material sustenance. Did I see a hand over here?
Yeah, I hesitate because I'm taking this a bit off that topic, but isn't there, to me, there's a second meaning to this care word.
Please.
Which is the repeated warnings. I think it started with Isaac. Don't go back to Egypt. Whatever, there was going looking for the spouse, I think. But there's several times, no way you guys going back to Egypt. So they had to for food, but the point is we're not staying. This is a temporary deal, and that's to me was implied by saying we're going to be strangers in your land. We aren't here to emigrate and get a green card.
Correct. So that's the intention. They wind up there for how long?
Just 400 years.
400 years, right?
Because God forgot. He just, things to do.
Right? So, yes, the intention definitely was we don't want to be here. We don't want to be in Egypt. We don't want to go down to Egypt, right? It's always going down.
We were told not to.
We were told not to.
Don't do that.
Don't do it. Because bad things happen when you go down to Egypt, right? And sure enough, that's exactly what happens.
The strange thing is today, the southern part of Egypt is called Upper Egypt, and northern Egypt is called Lower Egypt.
All right, now you're messing with my head. All right, we're gonna. I just want to push on to because I think we don't often get to this place to talk about what happens next. So I'm going to read. Joseph brought his father Jacob and presented him to Pharaoh. Verse 7, and Jacob greeted Paro. Paro asked Yaakov, "How many are the years of your life?" And Yaakov answers Paro, "The years of my sojourn on earth are 130. Few and hard have been the years of my life. Nor do they come up to the lifespan of my fathers during their sojourns." Then Yaakov bade Paro farewell and left Paro's presence. A poignant description by Yaakov of his own life as being short and painful. Yaakov's story is not an easy story. He's hugely wealthy. He's successful. He's reunited with his son. I always have looked as an adult at Yaakov's story going, right? Not particularly happy. And he self-identifies that way. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers, giving them holdings in the choicest part of the land of Egypt, in the region of Ramses, as Paro had commanded. Yosef sustained his father and his brothers and all his father's household with bread, down to the little ones. Now there was no bread in all the world, for the famine was very severe. Both in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. Yosef gathered in all the money that was to be found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan as payment for the rations that were being procured. And Yosef brought the money into Paro's palace. And when the money gave out in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Yosef and said, "Give us bread, lest we die before your very eyes, for the money is gone." And Yosef said, "Bring your livestock, and I will sell to you against your livestock if the money's gone." So they brought their livestock to Yosef, and Yosef gave them bread in exchange for the horses, for the stocks of sheep and cattle and the asses. Thus he provided them with bread that year in exchange for all their livestock. And when that year was ended, they came to him the next year and said, "And we cannot hide from my lord that with all the money and animal stocks consigned to my lord, nothing is left at my lord's disposal save our persons and our farmland. Let us not perish before your eyes, both we and our land. Take us and our land in exchange for bread, and we with our land will be serfs to Paro. Provide the seed that we may live and not die, and that the land may not become a waste. So Yosef gained possession of all the farmland of Egypt for Paro. Every Egyptian having sold his field because the famine was too much for them. Thus the land passed over to Paro. And he removed the population town by town from one end of Egypt's border to the other. Only the land of the priests he did not take over, for the priests had an allotment from Paro, and they lived off the allotment which Paro had made to them. Therefore, they did not sell their land. Then Yosef said to the people, whereas I have this day acquired you and your land for Paro, here is seed for you to sow the land. And when harvest comes, you shall give 1/5 to Paro, and 4/5 shall be yours as seed for the fields, and as food for you and those in your households, and as nourishment for your children. And they said, you have saved our lives. We are grateful to my Lord, and we shall be serfs to Paro. And Joseph made it into a land law in Egypt, which is still valid, that 1/5 should be Paro's. Only the land of the priests did not become Paro's. Thus Israel settled in the country of Egypt. In the region of Goshen, they acquired holdings in it and were fertile and increased greatly. What has Yosef done?
He set the seed for slavery.
He has set up the system whereby his his relatives become enslaved. So often we leave the story of Yosef at this place where he saves Egypt and his family from the famine and is risen and they're reunited. Yay! We don't often go here. This is dark.
Nice.
Do you think he did it by accident? I mean, he was trying to serve Pharaoh. He was trying to be so selfless. And just give it all to Pharaoh?
You're Pharaoh's number 2. You ain't gonna be Pharaoh. Closest you're gonna get is Pharaoh's number 2. Okay, so he is definitely propping up the government. He's propping up the king. 100%. That is his power. That becomes what Paro owes him. He owes it all to Yosef. And how do we know that that is an important factor? Because how does the next book that we start begin? There arose a king in Egypt who did not know Yosef. Yosef becomes the puppet master. He becomes the real ruler of Egypt in this sense, right? What he says goes. Of course, it's Paro who owns it all, but he's in control of all of the crown's resources. He has made Egypt a serfdom. People no longer owned land. Do we hear how important that is? They don't own land anymore. Paro now owns all the land. All the farmland. They become itinerant farmers. They don't own the land, and they have to give 1/5 of the produce to the crown. Sharecroppers. That's exactly what Yosef turns the entire land of Egypt into.
So his loyalty to Paro as a father was greater than his connection to his own father.
At best, I think what we can say is he was blinded, by loyalty to this new father, not thinking through maybe what it would do to his father because they're not supposed to be there very long anyway. At worst, he doesn't care, right? He's completely loyal to the new father figure and that father figure's worldview and interests.
But, maybe I got the timing wrong, but what he ended up doing, we've seen before, we see again in the Torah. This is how the problem of poverty was dealt with back then. I mean, it's right. You sell everything you have, and all you got left is to become a serf to somebody else, to survive.
So
this is just on an incredibly grand scale.
But was that the only option? Yosef has put in place a program for 7 years to save, grain, to save and store food, to feed the people. He's got the food to feed the people. Okay. Did he need to have them give all their money, then give all their animals, then give themselves and the land in exchange for that? I would argue no. Now, you know me, I'm going to read it in its context. To be fair to the text, Torah is describing the world that is. So you're absolutely right, Robert, that this was the way poverty was dealt with. What I find shocking every time I read this is the calculated extent to which Yosef reduced the entire population to poverty. They weren't poor when it started. And Egypt has the grain, to feed, and to take it to our situation. We currently have, by the way, we all know, enough food to feed everybody in the world who's hungry today. And we don't. It's not in our interest.
But wasn't this Joseph's job? I mean, it was.
Now, David, you come to a very interesting question. What is Joseph's role? What is his role? So,
not to do that really shows Pharaoh that he can't be trusted.
So absolutely, Joseph is 100% living into the best job he can do for Paro. What does Torah usually have to say about what's our role, right? So I think it's a real question about who this Joseph is, who he's become, that he's become fully Paro's right-hand guy, I was just doing my job.
Well, but he had
only following orders.
I was just following orders. I was doing my job.
That's not
true businessman.
Yeah, I don't think that's right. That has a connotation far different. Joseph's an intellect. This is a very smart guy. He shrewdly got his family safe. He also preserved his own status. And now he's in a position where he says, look, I'm number 2 here. And I think it's good for everybody. I don't attribute bad motives to Joseph. I think he's just doing what's expected of him.
So I think we can all agree Joseph is super smart. And smart can be super dangerous. And he reduces the entire population of Egypt to poverty and dependence on the crown. Is he doing his job? Absolutely. According to the palace. Do we in any way admire what Joseph sees as success? That is a question I put to you as we come to the conclusion of the story. Liz! But.
Where did all this grain come from to begin with? Didn't Joseph, in the dream interpretation, there's going to be 7 years of plenty? I'm so excited. And 7 years of famine. And so everybody, let's bring our extra grain together so we'll have it when there's a famine. So they've already
contributed. Correct.
For a rainy day.
Correct. And then he charges them for the grain they brought.
Yes.
100%. He's smart. He's a good businessman. Price gouging.
Presumably he bought cheap and sold dear. I mean, I assume they paid for it. He was wise. He saw the way the market was going to go.
That's it.
And sold dear.
Absolutely. It's the American way. Reuben?
Strange thing to me is that the Hebrews thought that was a good deal.
The Hebrew what?
Thought it was a good deal. They said, and I don't understand why, but they said. Everybody.
So I'm not
given us life.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that this is a statement of what they actually experience, as much as it is. They have slowly had everything taken away and have been disempowered. And when a population is disempowered, they tend, we tend to give a lot of things over to the authority, including gratitude for what they then show us or give us. Or
you can also look at it that they weren't looking ahead; they were saved. They were hungry, and he solved the problem for them. Tomorrow we'll worry about tomorrow. Who said that? Was that Gone with the Wind?
So David's okay with this. They're hungry. He's giving them grain. David's okay with the fact that they brought their grain once, and now they're having to pay dearly, even though the plan was to feed all of Egypt with that stored grain. Okay.
Is it possible that when he set the Pharaoh's tax at 20%, that he overshot the mark in the sense that he didn't realize possibly how difficult it would be for somebody to get out from under and ultimately buy their land back? In other words, if it had been, say, a 10% tax instead of a 20% tax, maybe in 5 years of good crops, 6 years of good crops, the farmer will have made enough money on the side to go back and say, okay, I'd like my land back. What do you want for it?
It's absolutely possible that he overshot and did not mean to enslave the population. I find it, as smart as he is, as powerful as he is, I find it hard to believe. They brought the grain, planning for a famine. The famine didn't just happen. Joseph knew it was coming. He planned for it. He stored their extra grain and then turns around and enslaves the population in exchange for the grain. Did he think they would get out from under that? I don't see any place indicating that he wanted them to.
He made this the law of the land. How could they?
That's right. Like that now it all belongs to Paro.
So we take it for granted that this was the plan that Paro would want, that the ideal would be to have a country full of slaves.
Heck to the yeah. So I'm going to give you something, even though it's a few years old, because I think the idea is still absolutely critical. It's from American Jewish World Service, and it talks about food aid and the ways that we do and don't provide food aid to other countries. Because one of the leading ways that we do that is in a way that makes them dependent on the United States. Right? We give them our grain, rather than helping them grow native grains, teaching them the technology, spending money on teaching people how to grow their own, food or sustain themselves in their particular part of the world. We want to support our corn farmers and ship a bunch of corn overseas. So I want to give it to you just to read to think about, wow, these ideas are not, even though they're 2,000 years old, it's still happening.
Why do you think Joseph did it?
Because I think he was doing his job, and I think he's become completely identified with Egypt. He's become completely identified with the monarchy.
You don't think it was to punish his own family?
He's doing it to the Egyptian population. Presumably, David says he's taking care. It says he's taking care of his family.
So you don't think he's at all aware how this would turn? Like he's not seeing the future. In the sense that a new pharaoh would arise and that thing?
I don't think so. I think he is completely dedicated to the palace and does what he thinks, right, is the best thing for the palace. And he does. He does do the best thing. Like David said, he's smart. He's a good businessman. He turns Pharaoh into an absolute ruler. That's exactly right.
Why is
David?
It seems like line 25 doesn't need to be there. When it says that they said you have given us life. You can go right from 24 to 26. This is what it is, and now it's the law of the land. That seems like it's a pretty powerful land. The people don't seem to be complaining.
Right, so that's what we were just talking about, that once people are truly disempowered, they often don't speak for themselves and are grateful for any crumb, right?
And then in 27, it seems to have, at the very last second, it's one of those, and there's maybe a happy ending, because now Jacob's back to being Israel again, fruitful and multiply greatly. So that sounds like, because then it says in the commentary that's sort of the beginning of they become a nation. It seems like they're throwing in a last minute, this is not a terrible thing, by saying that Israel has become fruitful and multiplied greatly.
I don't think that that's a statement about whether or not it's a terrible. I think you're right. I think I'm being harder on Joseph than Torah is. I agree. And I'm sorry David left because I want to admit that. I'm being much harder on Yosef than the tradition is. He's often lifted up as a hero. Just like David said, he's doing his job and he did it brilliantly. But I am not ready to let go of the dark underside that I think even Torah sees. That they are fruitful and multiplied doesn't mean they're doing well. It means there's more manpower for Pharaoh.
Was there any tradition of giving without getting something in return? Was there any tradition of just charity, pure charity? Could you give them food if they didn't give you anything?
100%.
There was.
Because we are told over and over in Torah law that you will feed the widow and the orphan. It doesn't say you'll take their payment.
But that's before this. I mean, that's after this.
Right, but the people who wrote that, the people who wrote this are coming from a value system that says there's a place below which you're not supposed to, as a community, let people fall, whether or not they can pay.
So the concept was there.
Yeah.
What do you think means this sentence? The priest's land alone did not become Pharaoh's. Is that
because Pharaoh's
priests?
Right.
It's not
right. Pharaoh's priests. Pharaoh's not stupid.
Right.
He may be powerful. He's not stupid. So he is not going to take anything away from the priesthood, because who are the folks who can bring down a Pharaoh? The priests.
The rabbis.
The rabbis. Exactly. Who does the king defer to? Only the church. Because it is who puts the crown on the king's head in the coronation ceremony? The highest representative of the church. And that is, so it has always been, so it will always be, right? That there is this tension of powers between the cult and the monarchy. And we see that absolutely Pharaoh is not going to touch the property or goods or rights or privileges of the cult.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.